Hey guys, Sly here, and welcome back to another episode of the Caspian Game Awards. Tonight, we're actually going to be doing the very last Caspian Awards that will be in sync with the Game Awards proper. Yes, we finally reached that point. And I'm not gonna lie, it's kinda weird, because we've started this series obviously back in January of this year, 2024, for those who are probably rewatching the recording. And obviously, instead of going forwards in time, we ended up going backwards. So we started with 2023, and, well, 21 episodes later, we are finally in the year which technically started the Game Awards as we know it. Well, not as we know it, but the first year that actually had a video game awards. And I don't know, that's just so weird to me. And yes, of course, I'm back because, I took the last week off for the most part, so I hope you guys were at least all right with that. I was just more focused on other things. I'll make sure that this week we'll have a bit more content on Twitch for you guys, so I hope you guys are pretty excited about that. But yeah, no, we've had a long way going up until this point, and it's gonna be weird. Now, that being said, that does not mean the end of the Game Awards for the Caspian Game Awards, because we are also going to have Game Awards for 1995 to 2002. Yes. We are, in fact, going to continue this series up until the middle of the 1990s. Mostly because, if I'm going to be honest, I feel like that's kind of when gaming started to really transition into a bit more, I don't want to say respected, but like it definitely evolved into how we know video games nowadays. Definitely by 1995. And also, that was the first year that E3 and hell, even IGN was around. Not that IGN's great, but you get the point. Like, video game journalism and just video game coverage started around the mid-90s. And so I'm for sure going to be going up until 1995. But if you guys want to, I might also just do the rest of the 1990s just to kind of see where exactly things might go. Granted, it's going to be a bit tougher because keep in mind that, like, not only would that just be an era that's, like, way before my time at that point, you can really tell my age, because, again, I'm someone who's in their 20s and not necessarily in their 30s, and so I didn't really grow up with a lot of Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis games, because that is what that era is, from around 1990 to 1994. And so, because of that, I'm only going to do those years if people request. Granted, that's probably going to take another 2 months until I even decide to do that anyways. And so you've got plenty of time if I end up doing so. And, well, if I do end up doing so, in the recording, shows that those years happened, well, you can thank this particular stream for that. But either way, that's not set in stone. But I am definitely opened up to the idea of doing the rest of the the first half of the 90s. But for sure, we'll be going from, after this, from 2002 all the way up to 1995. So I'm pretty excited to talk about those years because, well, some of those years are actually pretty damn good. Granted, there's some stinkers that are kind of here and there, but of course, let's not worry about that right now. Let's worry about 2003. Which, well, was, like I said, the very first year that ever had a Video Game Awards. Which, this is the mid-2000s. Yes, 2003 is mid-2000s, not early 2000s. But anyways. We're in the mid-2000s. 2003. Our first ever Video Game Award, giving out to different games that came out from this time period. That's pretty awesome. We finally got a lot of we finally got respect for video games. Granted, it took a bit longer than the amount of time that film pretty much got respected, because film, like movies, have been around since roughly the 1890s, mid 1890s, arguably. It wasn't until the 1920s where it started to get more respect. So, you know, video games have been around since the arguably late 50s. You know, Pong, of course, being the first successful video game in 1972, I believe. 71, 72. So, you know, a little bit longer than that, but, you know, that's fine. You know, bit of a, like, you know, 30, 45, like 30 to 45 year history. We got some respect, right? Like, you know, things are going to be okay, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the part of the video that I remind you guys that, unfortunately, we're still, in fact, talking about the Spike Video Game Awards here. Yes. Granted, I've clowned on them the entire time we've covered them, and to be fair, they definitely deserve it. But if I'm going to be honest, and granted, I was watching this with Goldie as well. It wasn't just me who was watching this. I was watching this with other people. This, honestly, and I'm just going to be frank up right now, 2003's Spike Video Game Awards has got to be not only the worst Game Awards show that has ever existed, like, not even a contest, like, compare it to literally every other year, and it's ranked pretty bad. But if I'm gonna be honest as well, this was arguably one of just the worst game award, like, just award ceremonies of all time. And that's saying a lot, considering that award ceremonies have been around for 95 years. This has got to be the absolute worst offender. It was so bad. I mean, for starters, they announced the Game of the Year as the first award that they did. You know, the titular award that everyone wants to see. Yeah, that's pretty bad. You did that as your first award. And, well, obviously we'll be talking about the Game of the Year that they gave out at the very end of the stream. But, oh my god, it was actually the worst. Like, holy shit, that was pretty bad. And, I mean, keep in mind, it also doesn't help that, like, you know, there were also plenty of really dumb awards that they ended up giving out. Like, granted, this is not a category here. I'm just going to preface that right now, because I have consistent categories. But the fact that, like, they have a category for best game based on a movie, and the winner of that was actually literally one of the worst games that came out that year. Go look it up for yourselves. Best game based on a movie, Game Awards 2003. You will be upset, because it was pretty bad as far as their choices there, and the game that ended up winning them. Or, you know, them, instead of, like, just saying, you know, best shooter game, they have best first person action, or just best action game as a category as opposed to action adventure. Like, it was honest. Oh, or granted, this is something that the Game Awards just did throughout the entire 2000s. Best performance by a human. Like, are you trying to be quirky? So, and that's not even going over just the blatant, just sexist cringe that Spike was very, very much into, very, very much into doing into these types of shows. And it was the cringiest shit I've ever seen. It's, okay, maybe, I mean, easily some of the cringiest shit I've ever seen. It was really bad. So, and again, that's just the Game Awards here. We haven't even talked about 2003 as a whole as far as video games, which, as far as 2003 is concerned for video games, it was fine. You know, it was okay. Like, definitely a year that I feel like because this was in the middle of the console, 6th generation console, like the 6th generation of video game consoles, so the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. We were just kind of more comfortable with what we were doing, and I think we were just a bit too comfortable. But make no mistake, 2003 had some absolute bangers come out, and we're going to be giving out some of those games awards, so definitely stay tuned for that. But yeah, this was kind of a bit of a dud year, which that's been of a common pattern I've noticed, is that like every 3 or so years, it's kind of a dud year. 2003 here, 2006 for sure. Funny enough, 2009 wasn't particularly a dud, although 2008, in my opinion, was, though I have softened up on that. I don't think that year was actually that bad. It's still not as great as like 2005, 7, or 9, in my opinion, but, I don't know. I just never really cared for 2008 as much, although it definitely was a better year than 2006. And so that debacle or that debate that you guys were wondering, I've resolved that. 2006 is a worse year than 2008 as far as video games. That's for sure. But anyways, other years, 2012 was kind of bad. 2015 was terrible. 2018 also kind of lame. And of course, well, we already covered it. 2021 and by extension 2022 being arguably the worst years in video game history. And of course, we already covered that in our, second and third episodes. So if you haven't, I'd recommend you guys watch those. But you get the point, is that every 3-ish years, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, just kind of depends. Basically, yeah, it's kind of a year. And well, as far as 2024, once we get to that year, because yes, in January for 2025, I will be covering this year, 2024, and so far this year hasn't particularly been all that great either. So, but you get the point. Yeah, 2003 was just kind of a weaker year. It's definitely not one of the worst years as far as video games. Hell, I wouldn't even consider it to be top 5 worst years that we've covered thus far. It's not even in that category. But it's definitely a year that was a bit more reserved. So do keep that in mind whenever we go through this. But of course, I know I keep dragging this on. Let's actually talk about the award show. It's let's actually give ourselves the final reassessment of the original game awards, because I think no matter what I end up choosing, people are going to agree with me. So, but in any event, let's go over the rules, because yes, we're going to be going over the rules first this time around, as opposed to doing it after we show the categories, because I think that's a better thing. Let's close that out, and then let's open this up. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure that the cursor doesn't disappear, because that caused some problems. But anyways, so let's go over the rules. You guys should know them by now. But for those who are still new, these are the general rules that they have. So rule number 1, we are not the Grammys. We do not have weird cutoff dates. A game, in order for it to qualify, has to have been released in between January 1st and December 31st of that year. So no weird, half the year before, and then another half of the year before that. We're not stupid like that. We're not the stupid Grammys.
Don't yell at me, yell at the Grammys.
That's stupid. So, rule number 2. And this one, I feel like at this point, I felt more comfortable to actually write it down. So, we here at the Caspian Game Awards initially, we do the initial release as a part of that rule. We are not just focused on North American releases, because, well, there's some games that were released in Japan in, let's say, for example, there's a game that released in North America in 2003, but it was released in Japan in 2002. We would count that as a 2002 game. So, I think that goes without saying with that. So, there you go. All right, rule number 3, as far as the expansion packs and by extension DLC, only games released in previous years will be considered, like as far as the expansions that comes from the games. So again, it's just to kind of, give light to a lot of expansion packs that came out in, after the game's initial launch. So again, once we get to it, it'll make more sense. And of course, by extension, only one expansion per game, because sometimes they release multiple expansions. So as far as years and as far as rules, for game of the year, it needs to generally be a liked game to be accepted. Though, if absolutely necessary, I will just straight up nominate games that I personally liked. So we'll get to that in a second. And it has to be a completely new game, so no remakes or remasters allowed. Completely new experience. And then last but not least, only games that I'm personally interested in will be chosen, because, well, it's my show, I can do whatever I want. And although I will kind of follow along with review scores, like, I will consider them, I won't strictly follow them, especially if it gets way too hard for me to find certain games. Because let's just say that, like, in some of the earlier episodes, I just straight the format we had here was completely kneecapped. That's how bad it's gotten, and unfortunately, I'm gonna have to probably do that for 2024. But that's a story for another day. But either way, let's show the categories, because I think these are going to be objectively better categories. So, and I think everyone would be fine with these. Unfortunately, Best Game by New Studio is still going to have to be snubbed. I just straight up could not find another game that would fit in that category. So, but everything else, thankfully, is fair game. So, but either way, let's get into it. Finally, starting off with the action-adventure category. So keep in mind, this includes straight-up action games, straight-up adventure games, action-adventure games, as well as horror games, since they rarely ever have multiple horror games that are good that release at any given time. So this technically was a category in the original Spike Video Game Awards, but it was in that best action game moniker that I gave. So you would think that, like, yeah, like, again, this is the first Game Awards, so, but, well, I kind of already spoiled it. This was a pretty bad award ceremony. So, but how many nominees did they at least give? 4, 5, 6, the general typical that you see in a lot of award ceremonies. How about I try to give you this? Yeah. How many games is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 9 games were nominated. I'm sorry, but that is way too many to choose. Like, that's just straight up way too many. And what's worse is that, well, going by our initial release rule, 3 of these games didn't even release in 2003. What are they doing? What are they doing? Yeah, like, not only did they decide to nominate games that weren't even released this year, but they also bloated the list as a result. Way too many games were nominated here. Not even questionable here. So, and, well, I get you don't want to feel like you're snubbing, choices. And hell, I'll even say this. There's even some choices that, like, from some of the previous award ceremonies that we've done, even I feel like I snubbed quite a few games. And I somewhat regret them. Granted, we'll do a Redux stream. Don't worry about that. But, like, you gotta have a limit, man. Like, you can't just nominate every game, especially when you consider that most of these games wouldn't even qualify with the rules that I have laid down. So, but let's talk about these. So, first of all, Return to Castle Wolfenstein. A game that we actually did stream. Granted, I did have my issues with it, but thankfully there's a mod that actually fixes a lot of those, but that's a story for another day. But you get the point is, well, this should not qualify. This was released in 2001, not 2003. Yes, I know technically they're going for the console release, but under my definition, it would already be too late because the initial launch of a game should be the one that should be counted, not a re-release. So, and by the way, I think this was for the Xbox release, if I'm not mistaken, which, again, makes even less sense considering that, like, you know, the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 ports of Return to Castle Wolfenstein, while not bad per se, they're just inferior in comparison to the PC version. So, well, they're not even consistent with that rule either, because, well, there's plenty of games that are even on here that had PC releases in 2003. Yep, they got qualified. So I don't know. Maybe they felt bad because they didn't have a Video Game Awards back in 2001, and so they're trying to make up for that, but again, you're already too late. So, no thank you. Also, another game that came out not in 2003, but is still being nominated, Hitman 2 Silent Assassin, which is a game that I do respect. I do think as far as Hitman games, this was definitely a massive, massive upgrade compared to the first game. But again, we are not counting the console versions here, which also were considered inferior compared to the PC version at the time. So this one probably makes even less sense, at least in my opinion. So I don't know what the Game Awards were thinking. Although, to be fair, they're more, as I mentioned before, like, I jokingly say this, but it's also unfortunately kind of sad and true. They are more focused on groping women than they are actually giving out proper awards. So, proves my point right there. So, anyways, Panzer Dragoon Orta. This one, I actually kind of understand why they ended up having this as a nominee. Granted, it's not like the first game I would have chosen, but as far as, like, you know, the Panzer Dragoon series kind of being a late Sega sort of franchise, as in, like, you know, this came out a year after they shut down support for the Dreamcast. As far as, like, you know, a game pretty late into that series, it's alright, but again, it unfortunately would not qualify for this particular list because it was released in Japan in 2002. So, it released in North America in 2003. So, in that aspect, I can understand why they would have nominated it. Hell, we've talked about plenty of games on this show already where they did the same exact thing, where a game released in the year before but was nominated the year after, because it was originally released in Japan or Europe or something like that. Fair, but just for making sure that we're not, you know, America-centric, I'd rather have the nominee be from that year. At least for me personally. So yeah, no. Alone, basically what I'm trying to say is that if we just removed those 3 games alone, like, that would have been at least a more consistent list. Unfortunately, that then leads us into our other problem. Most of these games aren't even traditional action-adventure games. They fit into other categories. Freedom Fighters, Max Payne 2, and SOCOM 2 being third-person shooters, and 13 up here being a first-person shooter. So, really only making 2 games even be able to be qualified. Excuse me. So, granted, these aren't bad games. Don't get it twisted. Like, Freedom Fighters, I'd actually argue, is actually a pretty hidden gem. Like, it's actually surprisingly pretty damn good. Also made by IO Interactive, funny enough, the same people who made Hitman. So, it's kind of weird to see 2 IO games be nominated here. Although, to be fair, Freedom Fighters, if you like a more, alternative, alternate 2000s where the Cold War continued on, and, well, it eventually devolved into World War III, it's actually kind of cool. Kind of a, what the Red Dawn reboot should have been. I'm just going to be frank about that. So, yeah, like, I'd give it a recommend, but definitely not for this list. Same thing with Max Payne 2, another game that is pretty phenomenal in a lot of ways. And, well, let's be honest here, like, really did solidify Max Payne as more of a household name, at least around this time period. But again, it is a third-person shooter. It would fit better in a shooter category rather than just general action-adventure. So, yeah. Same thing with SOCOM 2. Granted, more in the tactical shooter department. Keep in mind, this is actually before Ghost Recon was actually a third-person shooter. So this was kind of your only option for tactical third-person shooters for a brief time. But it, honestly, it's actually kind of decent as well. Granted, it has some weird controls, so it's not like the best game to like try to get yourself into. But as far as like, an early-ish, again, mid-console generation here by this point, but like as far as kind of being more of a shooter game that Sony was pumping out, not too shabby. Definitely better than the first SOCOM, at least in my opinion. But do keep in mind, it has some pretty different controls, so do keep that in mind. And then we got 13 up here, which this game, honestly, is pretty unique, because this was based off of, like, I think a comic strip from the mid-80s, if I'm not mistaken, or at least, like, it was heavily inspired by that. Or at least some sort of a comic. And, well, it literally took a lot of the aspects of traditional comic books and put it into its styling, which I thought was actually kind of cool and definitely unique, especially for a first-person shooter at the time. So, definitely a game that I would definitely also kind of recommend you guys check out. But, again, not necessarily a game that fits in this category, which means only 2 games would even have a slight chance of even being nominated on here. So, like, that's pretty bad. Like, I mean, here's the thing about Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3. So, obviously, the final of that trilogy is that, like, I don't actually really know what the general consensus of this game is. I know people fucking love the first Rogue Squadron. That's for sure. Like, most people that I know definitely would say that Rogue Squadron is fantastic. And it is pretty good. But then Rogue Squadrons 2 and 3, I don't really hear as much about. Maybe it was because those were GameCube games. So, they didn't really get as much coverage. I don't know, again, keep in mind, the GameCube was not a popular console at the time, so I think that's partially why. So, yeah, and then, well, with True Crime Streets of LA, I mean, truth be told, I've never played any of the True Crime games, so I don't really have an opinion on this game, if I'm going to be honest. It doesn't look bad. Like, as a matter of fact, like, it does kind of give me some GTA vibes, which obviously makes sense since, GTA's 3 and Vice City came out recently around this time, so I guess they were kind of following on the coattails of that. And funny enough, Sleeping Dogs, for those who don't know, fun fact about Sleeping Dogs, that was originally supposed to be a true crime game, but it ended up just kind of being its own thing. So I guess technically I did play, at least in spirit, a true crime game, but not like the main games proper. So again, I don't really have much of an opinion here. Like, I wish I did, but it's just, it's kind of hard to try to find a copy of this, especially since PC versions of this game are way too damn expensive. And I don't know if there's many releases on console. So, well, there's definitely a lot of releases on console, but I just prefer to play a lot of my games on PC unless if they're just exclusively on console. So, but that being said, funny enough, that was the game that ended up winning, which again, not the worst choice. Again, I don't really have much of opinion, so if this is a good game, let me know. But yeah, definitely not the first choice I would have chosen. And well, truth be told, this should set the tone for the Game Awards for 2003, by the way. Granted, we're not going to be covering every single award that they gave out because, again, some of them don't even fit with the categories that I gave, and frankly, just a lot of them are just stupid nominees and stupid winners. So, yeah, like, you get the point. So, but I do feel like that no matter what the choices I ended up choosing for best action adventure game, most people are going to agree with me on these. So let's showcase them off. That's a much better list. Like, and again, I don't think anyone is going to deny at least plenty of these. There's some people might disagree with, but I think most people are going to agree that these are definitely better picks. So let's start off with the kahuna itself, Silent Hill 3. I can finally actually talk about Silent Hill because I love the first two games, and well, Silent Hill 3 obviously continues on the survival horror aspect, following Heather this time around. But also kind of exploring outside of Silent Hill, the town itself, which I think is actually a pretty cool sort of concept, because, what about the surrounding areas of Silent Hill? What the hell's going on over there? And, of course, not to get into spoilers, because, yes, I know the story of Silent Hill 3. I was spoiled it by people, unfortunately. But it's definitely pretty thought-provoking. And definitely, raises quite a few questions. But good questions, nonetheless. So, I definitely do think that, yeah, this for sure fits in this category. Then we've got a game that people are probably going to be surprised is in this category. But is not in the platformer category. Jak 2. Well, yeah, you guys are probably wondering, why is this in this category? Doesn't it fit more in the platform category? Well, as I've mentioned plenty of times before, the PlayStation 2 era was definitely known for, its trinity of games, being Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank, and Jak and Daxter. But, as those series went on, they became less and less platformy. I would definitely say that Jak and Daxter, the first game, is definitely a platformer. The level design complements that, and just the general gameplay is that of a platformer. For sure. But this game went away from that. It went to a more quasi-open world level design, and had more shooter-like mechanics that were brought in. Granted, that's not the core of the combat, but still a decent amount of the core gameplay. And just kind of made it into more, like I said, just into a more general action-adventure game. And granted, I will definitely say this. Saimori, friend of the channel, I hope he's not watching because he's streaming right now. I love you. Platonically. He hated this game. So he's probably crying right now that I have this game right now. But it is a genuinely good game. Yes, it has its problems, but it is a fun sort of action-adventure that's, fleshes out its world, takes itself a bit more seriously, and I think overall, is a fun time to just kind of, blast a bunch of robot dudes with. So I would definitely say that this is it definitely deserves to be a nominee on here. And then, well, I feel like I've been bringing up Castlevania a lot, but that's just because I respect the hell out of Castlevania. Now, that being said, even though I do respect Castlevania as a whole, I will admit Lament of Innocence is a game that's more of a personal pick rather than like an objective pick here. It was definitely a game that it's not a bad game. Like, I think most people who definitely do think Castlevania Lament of Innocence, who played it, they do think it is good, but definitely not as good as like some of the other goats of just the franchise. Because keep in mind, this was technically the second game that was 3D in the Castlevania franchise. But instead of being a platformer or like a role-playing game, this was more of a hack and slash game. Very, very, very similar to that of the Devil May Cry games that were released around this time. So it was kind of more following on the coattails of that franchise. Although, funny enough, keep in mind, this was the year of Devil May Cry 2. And so they did somehow make Castlevania, ironically made a better Castlevania, like a better Devil May Cry than Devil May Cry. So take that for what you will. But it's still a decent game. I would definitely, at least personally, would recommend it, especially if you want more of a hack and slash Castlevania. Yeah, there's the Lord of Shadow games as well, but if you want like a decent experience of the PlayStation 2, this one's a decent recommendation that I can give. And then we got Broken Sword 3, The Sleeping Dragon. So this is more of just a general adventure game, which we rarely have on this series. I apologize for the fact that we don't really have a lot of adventure games on here. But yeah, this was the follow-up of the point-and-click series, Broken Sword. It was popular back in the mid-ish to late-ish 90s, like 96, 97. You know, it was the long-anticipated follow-up to those games. And it definitely does continue a lot of the more mysterious, treasure hunting sort of aspects that were in the previous games. And yeah, just kind of continues on that sort of, trajectory. And, I recommend you guys check it out, especially if you're more into stuff that's a bit more grounded. So, granted, it may not be for everyone, but it's worth a look. Especially since, it was the progenitor of a lot of these other types of games anyways. So, and then, well, we've got maybe the most controversial game that's on this list. I only say controversial because I actually don't know the general consensus of this game in particular, but we've got ourselves Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly, which, well, was the follow-up to 2001's Fatal Frame, which was honestly a pretty damn unique game for its time, like, especially in the survival horror genre. And, well, Fatal Frame 2, of course, following up on that, but taking a more of an anthology approach to it. So it has nothing to do with the first game. And just continuing off a lot of those really cool aspects of relying on your camera to defend yourself against these ghosts. I think that's pretty cool. And I mean, just look at that cover. That's a creepy as fuck cover. Oh my god. Like, God, if I'm gonna be honest, just talking, I've just been looking at that the entire time. God, it is a pretty chilling, like, cover. Obviously, Shining inspired, but, like, yeah, like, go check it out. You guys know, like, I rarely ever nominate too many horror games outside of Resident Evil, of course, Silent Hill also being a horror game. So if it's a horror game that I can recommend, I can recommend it. And then last but not least, we got ourselves Beyond Good and Evil, a game that has had a long-awaited sequel that is still not out yet. Ubisoft, what the fuck? You showed multiple trailers. Why are you not releasing Beyond Good and Evil 2? What the fuck? I don't get it. I don't get it. But anyways, for those who don't know, more of a science fiction story. and just kind of more. It takes some stealth elements, but I wouldn't really call it a stealth game. It's more just a general. Honestly, I'd probably compare it more to something akin to, funny enough, a Jack and Daxter or a Ratchet and Clank, where it's more, just more general action adventure-y. It's a lot more story driven compared to a lot of our other games that were coming around this time. And yes, I know she looks like Alex Vance. Shut up, but it's the different character. But I felt like I should have nominated this, especially considering that, like, not only was this unfortunately kind of snubbed whenever it first came out, like, this game did not sell that many copies when it first came out. But I think the concept's kind of cool with, you know, it's more sort of lived in sort of science fiction approach that it takes. And that's something I can appreciate. So definitely a game that if you're more into more acrobatic sort of movement and combat, and you like more of a contemporary science fiction, Beyond Good and Evil, I can recommend. So, but of course, I got the envelope, which means we got ourselves an award to give. So let's do that. So here we go. This is the part of the video where I do my thing. So, and oh my god, I took way too long talking about those games. Holy shit. Anyways, let's get on here. So, the award for the best action adventure game of 2003 goes to Silent Hill 3. Yeah. It's about damn time we talk about Silent Hill. Because you guys know I streamed the first two Silent Hill games. I thought they were fantastic. And Silent Hill 3, while it definitely does take some steps backwards, I think it takes some steps forward in a lot of ways. Especially when it comes to just kind of tying in both of the previous games and doing it. Not as much Silent Hill 2, but definitely Silent Hill 1. And, well, a lot of those, like, you know, gameplay of Silent Hill 2 was way more fleshed out in this game. And I think it was definitely for the best. It has, granted, these early Silent Hill games were phenomenal. They've always been phenomenal with its atmosphere and just the dingy, grimy, grungy environments that they've always had, especially, like, obviously in the more hell sections, but even when you're not in hell and you're just kind of walking around the apartments and just the mall in this game's case, it's still very creepy. Like, you know? And like I said, this is the first game to explore beyond the actual titular town. And obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything for you guys, but yeah, it does kind of flesh out this sort of area way more than people initially could have thought, because with Silent Hill, you would think, well, it's just only really a town, you know? Can you, like, there's not really much you can explore. But what about the fact that, like, you know, this sort of cult group, what if they have the ability to actually kind of continue spreading it around? What do you do from there? You gotta play this game to figure out. And that, of course, gets it into the fact that this game is pretty fucked up in good ways, but it's pretty fucked as far as, like, some of the creature designs. It's definitely one of the scarier fucking games that, like, I took personal time to get into. Again, I didn't go too deep into it, don't worry. So, like, unfortunately, I know the fucking ending, but I would definitely recommend you guys check out Silent Hill 3. Like, granted, you can technically play Silent Hill 1. If you want to. I don't know. You don't have to play Silent Hill 1 in order for you to understand Silent Hill 3, but I would definitely recommend you guys do so. Trust me, it's very... Yeah, it definitely has a lot of ties between Silent Hill 1, like, with Silent Hill 1, for sure. Not as much Silent Hill 2, more so gameplay-wise, but whatever. Go check it out. So, alright, next category. Platformers. So, of course, mid-2000s platformers were still decently popular, though, at least doing my research, they definitely started to decline. Granted, 2003, we will start seeing a bit more just actual platformers maybe pop up. Yes, I know I brought up the fact that, like, you know, Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, and Sly Cooper, I don't fully consider to be platformer franchises. As a matter of fact, it really annoys me when people call Sly Cooper a platformer. It's like, no, it's maybe the first game, but definitely not the other games for sure. Stop calling them platformers. You, knob. But I ended up choosing, as far as like this particular category, obviously Sly Cooper wouldn't nominate anyways, since there was no Sly Cooper game released this year. But, well, also, spoiler alert, yes, there was a Ratchet and Clank game that was from 2003, but spoiler alert, it's not going to be nominated here either, because it's a different category, but we'll get to that later. So what did I end up choosing then? Well, we've got ourselves some other decent games that I think most people would definitely agree should be on this. So, wow, I called that Rayman 2. It should be Rayman 3. Let me fix that for you guys. There we go. Don't worry, it's split second. So, there we go. Rayman 3. So, obviously the sequel to 1999's Rayman 2, which is highly regarded as one of the best platformers on the PlayStation 1, for sure. And, well, this was kind of the last of that original line of Rayman games. And yeah, it's actually pretty good. Like, I would definitely recommend you guys check it out. Granted, like, you can definitely argue whether or not it's better than the first Rayman, but I definitely do think that, like, most people would agree it's, like, pretty damn good. And thankfully this was a multi-console generation release, so it had that going for it as well. It wasn't just, you know, tied to one specific platform. So, that's pretty awesome. And then we've got ourselves a game that I did a bit of digging for, because I will admit there were quite a few games that I was considering, but ultimately I ended up not choosing because they had some either technical issues that plagued the experience, or, well, I didn't fully consider them platformers. So I then decided, you know what, I'm going to check out the GBA, Game Boy Advance. You know, pretty decently popular at the time console. Was there anything there? And yes, there was. Ninja 5-0. A game that basically was kind of a spiritual successor to the older Ninja Gaiden games from the late 80s, early 90s. And yeah, no, I think it was, at least I personally thought it was actually kind of cool. It may not have been the most revolutionary platformer, but as far as 2D platformers are concerned, yeah, no, this one actually was a bit more enjoyable than I was thinking. And, you know, I felt like this game was kind of snubbed, because, again, GBA, being a handheld, isn't really nearly as talked about as PC or console games. And as far as GBA games are concerned, this one is actually a pretty hidden gem. Combat works, platforming, I think. It definitely has a lot more precise platforming required, but still enjoyable nonetheless. So, if you guys can, I recommend you guys check it out, even if you have to use alternative methods to do so. Totally not just pulling out my Super Nintendo for no reason. But then we've got ourselves a game that, unironically, is actually way more enjoyable than I thought it was going to be. And I say that wholeheartedly. And yes, this is a licensed game, but hear me out with this one. SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. I know you guys are laughing, but unironically, this is awesome. And I mentioned this in the previous episode, is that like movie license games or just licensed games in general that don't start with the words Star Wars or Lord of the Rings tend to be kind of crappy. But, well, dare I say that the console version of this game, not the PC version this time around, the console release of Battle for Bikini Bottom was actually pretty good. I, of course, have more memories with the movie game, which used the same engine, used the same assets, used, same general gameplay. But as far as being more of an explorative platformer, this one was actually a lot more enjoyable than I thought. It also helped that you got to play as a bunch of different characters from SpongeBob, fighting against Plankton's sort of, out of control robotic army that he created. And I thought that, playing through this was fairly enjoyable. Unironically, this was a pretty good thing, even if Mr. Krabs' voice actor in this was not what it should have been, but that's more of a voice acting issue rather than like a thing. But you get the point. I recommend it, especially if you're a fan of SpongeBob. I recommend you guys check this one out. And then last but not least, we got ourselves Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. And oh boy, this game. How the hell I've not gotten to this game yet, I don't know. I'm shooting myself kind of in the foot that I have not touched this game yet, because this game is pretty awesome. It has its problems. It is dated in several ways, but man, playing through this game is pretty good. Granted, of course, this then gets into what I mentioned in some of the previous episodes. Yes, this is a platformer, I guess, but like it's a different type of game than traditional platformers. And of course, I'm not going to have the whole spew that I had about certain games being called platformers, which I fundamentally disagree with being called platformers. I'm not going to have that whole spiel again. Go watch the more recent videos that I've had as far as the Game Awards are concerned, if you want more information on that. But I will admit, this one's kind of stretching the definition of a platformer. But even if, we're taking the benefit of the doubt, this game is pretty awesome in its own right. I highly recommend you guys check it out. But of course, winter time. So, let's do it. So, the award for the best platformer of 2003 goes to Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. Yep. This game is pretty awesome, like I said. Dare I say it's definitely one of the better games from 2003 for damn sure. It's not even a close contest. Of course, and this is something that, funny enough, some people actually don't realize, including my friend Saimori. This actually was a reboot of a older franchise, a long-running platformer franchise of the same name. Been around since the very late 80s. And, well, as far as transitioning into more of a 3D route, this was a way better attempt than the previous attempt. Don't look up Prince of Persia 3 1999 unless you want to listen to the soundtrack. Soundtrack's actually pretty baller on that, but otherwise that game doesn't exist. But as far as, doing Prince of Persia in 3D, this game did it extraordinarily well. And it's helped by the fact that this game uses the Sands of Time, the Dagger of Time specifically itself, for your ability to reverse time so that you can make up for a lot of the mistakes that you make in game, which is a really awesome mechanic that was of course brought into the other Sands of Times games. And very loosely in Prince of Persia 2008, though not as like thoroughly fleshed out compared to this game. And I think it works, fantastically for it. Also, it's helped by the fact that like this game has, granted, it's more exaggerated still, but it has more of a realistic design as far as its levels are concerned. You're not just going through just floating platform to platform. You're going through different rooms. You're going through different dungeons. You're going through underground areas. You're going through entire hallways. Like, the level design definitely feels more like it was originally lived in. And that's something that I do appreciate about this game, is that it's tried to at least make it a bit more believable, even if it's still fantastical. And that's pretty awesome. And of course, combat, while not perfect, definitely does kind of serve to, help you against fighting different enemies. And funny enough, actually was kind of one of the precursors to what eventually Assassin's Creed style of combat would be. So depending on how you feel about that, you can blame this game for that. So praise or blame. There you go. And of course, the puzzles, they're pretty enjoyable to go through. So yeah, no, definitely a solid game that, like, even if it may not be a traditional platformer, and even I'm kind of stretching the definition for this game, I would recommend you guys certainly check it out, for damn sure. So, and thankfully it's on Steam for very cheap, so even if you can't find a PS2 copy, you can still buy it on Steam for very cheap, so that's awesome. Alright, role-playing games, RPGs. So, funny enough, this was actually not a category in the original Game Awards. I was thoroughly shocked, because, role-playing games have been around since the mid-80s. Like, it was kind of surprising not to see them, especially considering that this year had some pretty big releases as far as role-playing games were concerned. Like, how the hell did they not nominate a single game from this category at all is beyond me. So, but what did I end up choosing? Because, well, I'm hyping this up for a reason. Because, well, yeah, you see that list, right? You see that list, right? Pretty damn big year as far as role-playing games are concerned. Like, holy shit. But, okay, first of all, let's talk about Shin Megami Tensei 3. So, this was, funny enough, spoiler alert for 2004, by the way, this was actually nominated in the original Game Awards for 2004. But, again, by our ruling, we go by the initial release, and this was originally released in Japan in 2003. Very early 2003, as a matter of fact. And it fits way better here. And, well, I don't think anyone's going to be complaining, because, at least as far as my research is concerned, this is regarded as being the best Shin Megami Tensei game that isn't in the Persona sub-franchise. And I think that's perfectly fair. Especially if you're definitely more into more of a, at least somewhat grounded, and I do air quotes and grounded, because Shin Megami Tensei obviously is very fantastical in different ways, but if you like a more sort of grounded experience as far as your JRPGs are concerned, this is definitely a good choice for you, especially since they recently did re-release this as a remaster. I think, was it last year, sometime later earlier this year. So definitely a game I would recommend you guys check out. Another game that I would also recommend you guys check out, at least in spirit, would be Final Fantasy X2. So this is a kind of another weird game, because X2, what is that implying? Well, that is implying that this is actually more of a continuation of Final Fantasy X's general storyline. Yes, this game. It's following up on another one of their Final Fantasy games. Like, because, well, for context, Final Fantasy games are typically anthology games. They don't follow each other, or at least the mainline games don't follow each other at all. They might have like similar, like, beats, similar themes, similar, fantasy races and creatures, but they are not in the same universes as each other. They are completely separated stories. So to have a game follow up on what a lot of people consider to be their favorite Final Fantasy game and continue that storyline, I think actually was a pretty bold, but definitely a move that, worked out for sure. Is it as good as Final Fantasy X base? Probably not, but if you liked those characters and you liked that sort of, more, I guess, beach vibe thing that they were going on with that game, Final Fantasy X-2 is definitely going to be up your alley. And then we've got Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade, which I was debating on whether or not I was going to have this more in the strategy category or the role-playing game category, but I ultimately ended up choosing it here. Though you could argue it could be nominated in neither category, since Fire Emblem games are typically both role-playing games and strategy games. It's definitely more, like that. And also, we already had so many choices for strategy games anyways. So, but granted, now keep in mind, this was actually, in North America, this was just released as Fire Emblem, for context. And this was on the GBA. So, just keep that in the back of your minds. But as far as, like, sort of being, this was the second game in that sort of trilogy of GBA Fire Emblem games. And as far as being, like, the middle of that, it was, definitely an improvement on some of the quirks that the first GBA Fire Emblem game had. It had a bit more of a fleshed out UI and more use of God, why can't I think of the term? Use of combat options for whenever you go into battle. So, as far as I'm concerned, definitely a decent choice to have here. So, and then we've got ourselves Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. Yes, we're nominating another Castlevania game again. I like Castlevania, okay? Like, I like these, like, post Symphony of the Night games. Shut up. But anyways, as far as this game's concerned, this was also a part of a trilogy, but this was the last of that GBA trilogy. And I will admit, this one was a bit weaker compared to Circle of the Moon, but I will definitely say that as far as, like, the ending of that sort of line of GBA Castlevania games, if you like what you kind of got with those, it's definitely like a game that, like, I would still recommend. So go check it out. And then, well, we've got ourselves Star Wars Knights of the Old Damn Republic right here. So this game is highly regarded as being one of the best Star Wars games of all time. I'd be hard-pressed not to nominate it here. Granted, I will admit, my only quirk with the game, funny enough, is the actual combat itself, because the combat is done automatically. And I don't know if I'm a big fan of that, but everything else is fantastic. The fact that this was set thousands of years before the events of the movies actually helped. So they were able to do a lot more creative freedom with this and sort of showcase the Sith essentially at their peak at this point. And that is pretty awesome to me. And it's also helped by the fact that, like, this game has amazing attention to detail and just overall has so much, world building for this era in the Star Wars universe. Too bad, unfortunately, it's considered Legends, but it'll always be canon in my heart. So, and then last but not least, we got ourselves, funny enough, the first Mario and Luigi game, Superstar Saga. So, this was released, kind of, again, in an awkward time because, yeah, GBA and Nintendo in general, I guess, they were kind of in a bit of a pickle. Like, Nintendo was just kind of, I mean, granted, N64, Nintendo was, funny enough, people tend to forget this, but the N64, while yes, it has some of the most revered games of all time released on that console, it actually wasn't a big success at the time. Just looking at the numbers, yeah, not only did that console not sell as well as like the previous consoles that they had, but it also just did not have nearly as many games sold on that. And we saw a similar trajectory with the GameCube and even the GBA a little bit. Like, they were just kind of in a bit of a rough period in the early, from the late 90s to about the mid 2000s. And, well, games like this kind of unfortunately kind of got snubbed under the rug. Because as far as, continuing the idea of having RPG Mario games, this one was definitely more of an ingenious one, taking more of a, having a different villain, as you can see, not having Bowser be the main antagonist this time around, at least in my opinion, is a welcome fresh breath of fresh air. And, well, having Luigi, continue being, the co-star here, I think definitely helped out. Luigi's Mansion definitely proved that Luigi can be a good main protagonist. So having his story, maybe not necessarily fleshed out, but definitely having a bit more weight to the gameplay, I think worked out here. So, but yeah, either way, we got some pretty good choices here. But ultimately, there can only be one winner, as always. I say that all the time, but it is unfortunately true. So, here we go. So, the award for the best role-playing game of 2003 goes to Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I think it was pretty obvious that this was going to be the winner. Again, like I said, I do have issues with it, but ultimately, Knights of the Old Republic is definitely a grand example of how you do a Star Wars story that is not tied to a movie or a television show. Like, again, it has one of the most interesting just storylines that, or I guess storylines, if you're gonna be, pedantical about it, that any game has. Like, obviously you've got Darth Malak here in the cover. He's the main antagonist of the game. But then you also learn about another, Darth that he was around, named Revan. Interesting. But, and well, I mean, this might surprise you guys, but I really do like learning about this era as far as Star Wars content is concerned. It does suck that, a lot of the stuff has been reduced to Legends, because this is some of the best material that Star Wars has ever had as far as writing and as far as, world building. And just overall, fleshing out a conflict that happened in that universe. And, well, of course, this being the introduction to Revan is a pretty good thing, because, well, if you guys didn't actually pay attention, I don't know if you can see at the very, very edge right there. Yeah, that's a Revan Funko Pop right there. That's the most I've ever spent on a Funko Pop, by the way. Don't fucking spend $45 goddamn dollars on a fucking Funko Pop ever. That's stupid. But I made an exception for him because I like Revan. So, but yeah, like Revan being a fucking badass, and being, at least in my opinion, the best Star Wars character that is not in any movie or TV show. Like, oh my god. I know I'm gushing about Revan, but anyways. Revan's cool, and, you know, not Sabine, fucking, god damn it, I can't think of her name. One in the cover, but she's cool. HK-47 right there. Or even just, like, going through the different planets, like Terrace and Dantooine. It's just such a, you know, it's definitely one of the most immersive role-playing games ever. And, well, definitely showed that BioWare still had some pretty good chops. So, and of course they would have good things to come. As far as these other points, of course, there's quite a few character options that you have for your main character, and of course we got ourselves multiple endings here, with a plot twist that I'm not going to spoil for you guys, but pretty big. And, well, as I've been saying, this game helped flesh out the past of Star Wars, and I think it was definitely for the best. Not even just the past before the movies, but even the past before the games. It's like the game itself, and the implications that has. So yeah, overall, go and play Knights of the Old Republic. You will not regret it. So, again, the combat might be the only thing that might turn people off, but don't worry, it's worth it. But what about the shooter category? So, funny enough, I say that a lot as well. While there wasn't actually a category directly for shooter games in the original Spike Video Game Awards, released in this iteration, the closest thing was the best first-person action category that we saw earlier, which, at least in my mind, translates to first-person shooter. Of course, we expand the definition out to where it includes all types of shooter games, whether it's first or third person, or even, in some cases, maybe even arcade shooters, but we haven't nominated those yet. Like, it's the closest thing we've got. But did they at least give good nominees? Because we've shit on the Spike Video Game Awards a lot. Can we at least give them a win? Still, no, unfortunately. Or at least, definitely not in the ways in which I wish. So, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to rant about Return to Castle Wolfenstein. I already ranted about that. It shouldn't even be on here. But what I am going to rant about, and by the way, there's also 9 choices on here for some fucking reason. But what I am going to nominate here, I am going to have a problem with, why the hell are you nominating Halo Combat Evolved for 2003? Motherfucker. That is not only a game from 2001, that is the game from 2001. It shouldn't even be here. Granted, again, I know you missed out on 2001. You want to fucking jerk off to Halo Combat Evolved. I get it. It's a fucking amazing game. It's one of my favorite games of all time, too. I fucking love Halo Combat Evolved. But a PC port by Gearbox Software should not justify it. Ever. Even if it's the PC version is actually not too bad. No. I'm sorry. This comes from a place of love. In good faith, I cannot have Halo be nominated here. In good faith. So, yeah. It sucks to say, but it's the truth. I'm sorry. I got to be truthful for you guys. It's not a good choice for 2003. It's only for 2001. So, I got to be truthful here. And also, I got to be truthful about the fact that they decided to not only nominate Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, but more specifically, an expansion pack for Ghost Recon for whatever stupid reason. Oh my god. It didn't even... God, this is so dumb. Again, Ghost Recon, the first Ghost Recon at least, I think it's pretty awesome. Like, it's definitely very different compared to the newer games, because it's a first-person tactical shooter as opposed to a third-person squad shooter. Even though, yeah, they technically do find a squad, but whatever. But again, this was an expansion pack, which shouldn't even be qualifiable for this list. But also, again, it was released in 2002, not 2003. So, no. Also, speaking of expansion packs, why the hell are you nominating Battlefield 1942's Secret Weapons of World War II? Again, a decent expansion pack, but A, that's not even the best expansion pack that, like, Battlefield 1942 had, but also, it's not a game. It's not a game. You have to have the base game to play it too. Again, I have the discs. It requires me to have Battlefield 1942's base game in order for me to actually even play this expansion. You guys saw, I streamed this earlier this year, funny enough. It just won't work. So yeah, no. Stupid, actually dumb. This shouldn't even be nominated here. So, but what about the other games here? Because we've got ourselves 5 games that do qualify. Which, fair. They all do qualify. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to nominate them, though. Take example, Chrome. So, this was a game that was released on the Chrome engine. Hence the, Chrome engine, hence the name, Chrome. Who developed this? Because, well, they need to be fucking fired. Techland. Okay, so, yeah, Techland made this. You know, the same developers who made Call of Juarez and Dead Island. This was one of their first games. It wasn't their first game. At least I don't think it was. Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was the first. It was just the first thing. Unfortunately, we've got ourselves a bit of a Far Cry 1 Crytek situation here, where this is just straight up, well,
Not good.
It's not a very good game. Shooting sucks, movement is terrible, and the story is extremely jarring. Again, part of the problem is that this game was trying to, it was following on the coattails of what Halo kind of Combat Evolved was able to achieve. So, yeah, you can probably tell this was trying to be a Halo killer, in air quotes. And this was kind of the beginning of that era, of the Halo killers. And, well, this one fell flat on its face. No one remembers Chrome, and for good reason. So, yeah, no, I can't nominate it. And, well, while I can't nominate that because it's a bad game, I also unfortunately cannot nominate PlanetSide. And that sucks because I've actually played PlanetSide 2 plenty of times. I think that game is pretty fucking awesome as far as it being a MMO FPS is concerned. And of course, its predecessor here, at least in concept, is pretty awesome for that. But, well, there is one problem with this game. It was an always online, multiplayer only game. Which means I cannot play this, or at least not through normal means. I would have to like download like a million different clients in order for me to even have the ability, to play with other people. And well, considering that this was a game meant for, minimum 16v16, and this game didn't have bots, that's going to be a very hard ask and a hard pill to swallow. And that sucks, because this game looks fucking awesome. And I had imagined that back in the day, this would have been a pretty cool game to play. Unfortunately, by the time I figured out that PlanetSide was even a franchise, the servers were already shut down for this game. So, yeah. Again, this is why I'm a huge advocate for having not only single player options, but more specifically, have bots in your fucking games, people. They help keep your games from not being completely obsolete and dead. Come on, guys. I mean, Battlefield was having bots in their games by this point. There's no excuse. Again, this game was released in that era in which multiplayer games weren't even dominant yet. So I think this is just a case of it was just a bit too early for its time. So, yeah. I think that's ultimately this game's problem. So, that being said, 13's also on here. Here's the thing about 13, is that it's a cool game, but I don't know if it's a game that I would choose as it wouldn't be my first choice. So that's why I'm not really acknowledging it. By the way, I apologize. But that being said, games that definitely would be first choices for me: Rainbow Six 3, specifically the PC version this time around, not the console version. I know it's confusing. Again, this is the era where console and PC versions were different. It's stupid. And Call of Duty. So, Rainbow Six 3, Raven Shield specifically, so the PC port, is, in my opinion, one of the best just shooter games of all time. And, in my opinion, it is debatably the best tactical shooter that has ever been made. For a multitude of reasons. But to boil it down, basically just the fact that this game basically continued off of what the first two Rainbow Six games did, but, overhauled the squad mechanic to where you can have 3 squads as opposed to just only 2 with the 4. 2 squads with only 4 guys. You have 4 squads this time around, which adds a lot of more tactical options, the amount of weapons that they added in here, and also just the general level design being more accommodating for it being more on a vertical platform. More of a elevated and vertical plane was pretty cool. And again, just the new commands really helped flesh this game out to be, at least in my opinion, one of the best games of this era. And, well, it's helped by the fact that shit, I just completely forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, it's also helped by the fact that this game, you're fighting a bunch of neo-Nazis, so at the end of the day, that's a double win for me. Speaking of actual Nazis, Call of Duty 1. Now, I have given the Game Awards tons of shit for nominating Call of Duty every goddamn year, because they shouldn't be doing that. Call of Duty, as a franchise, shouldn't have the amount of games that it does, and that's coming from someone who likes Call of Duty. That being said, though, I can definitely see why this game ended up having a bit of a splash immediately when it came out. I mean, just the general level design, the way which, you know, weapon sway works, it's way more smooth. Like the controls themselves is some of the smoothest that this era had. The fact that you got to play as more than just the United States, you got to play as the British and the Russians, or the Soviets, whatever. And, well, it also basically just being a very, you know, granted, like a very historically inaccurate game. Let's just be real here. Go watch the Frosty ones, every single inaccuracy of Call of Duty 1 video on YouTube. It's very inaccurate, but it's still a game that, like, it makes you feel immersed, especially with its amazing sound design and its pretty good scripted sequences. So there's a reason why this game eventually became a franchise. Even if that was definitely, you know, for better or for worse, you can't deny that this original game did leave a splash, which should not surprise you that it was the winner of the best shooter category for this, or best first-person action for this. Which, yes, does mean that ever since not only this franchise's inception, but also the Game Awards inception, that it has been the critical darling of the Game Awards ever since, for better and for worse. So that I can condemn, but as far as the game itself, I'm not going to fault it. So, but regardless, not particularly the best as far as nominees. So let's fix that. So first of all, we're going to change it from just strictly first person, and we're going to allow third person to be on here as well, which gives us a lot more variety, because this is the category in which I feel like Freedom Fighters, Max Payne 2, and SOCOM 2 absolutely deserve to be in. They make way more sense to be in the shooter designated category rather than the action adventure category. Because, well, they're all third-person shooters at their core. And, well, pretty decent ones at that. So, I don't think anyone's going to go on to me on that. But, also, Ratchet and Clank, I'm also going to have on here. I did not nominate it for platformer, so I nominated for the shooter category. Ratchet and Clank Going Commando, obviously adding a lot more, some quality of life stuff in comparison to the first Ratchet and Clank. You can actually strafe in this game finally. You can actually upgrade, and like you can upgrade most of your weapons here. The open combat sections where you can scourge for some crystals for bolts. Those are pretty cool areas as well. And just the general ground level design, I think, is still solid in this game. I will admit, this game does have some pretty big flaws. Specifically, anything involving a vehicle is literal pain. I streamed this, I think, 2-3 years ago. I will admit the vehicle sections in this game were a pain in the ass. And also the boss fights are way too fucking easy. But other than those two glaring problems, I still think that, like, it's worthy to be a nomination, especially when you consider that, like, you know, even if they did take some steps back, they did some absolute amazing step forwards with this. So I gotta give Going Commando some props. So even if it's not my favorite Ratchet and Clank game. So, but let's go on with the winner. So, all right. So the award for the best shooter game of 2003. Not surprising quite a few of you guys, but I'm going to still do it anyways because I think it's funny. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six 3 Raven Shield, specifically. So, yeah, this game wins the shooter game. And I think most people are going to agree, because this is honestly one of the best tactical shooters ever made. But why is that? Well, as I've already mentioned, this was basically a general overhaul of the previous games, not just graphically but also gameplay wise. Or well, loosely gameplay wise. It was more so just like I said, it was more so continuing, but it was okay. Let me back up what I was trying to say. It was an overhaul as far as mechanics and as far as level design. But it was definitely, it still kept at the core of what the first two Rainbow Six games were doing. And that's something that I think I have to appreciate with this game. And I do think definitely does warrant a lot of praise. It also helps the fact that like the gameplay, I think overall was definitely way more balanced, because there are some instances, at least in the first Rainbow Six and in Rogue Spear, where it's kind of bullshit. Whereas with this game, it's a lot more forgiving in its easier difficulties, and even in its harder difficulties, it still tries to maintain a bit more of a fair challenge, and that's something I appreciate. Also, the fact that this game has way more weapons and equipment options for your teams is pretty awesome. And well, if I'm going to be honest, this game has some pretty cool looking areas. A lot of areas taking place in Latin America, but also in Europe, which, having those Latin America sections, I think is pretty cool. And, well, like I said, this game has some of the best close quarters combat that you'll see in any tactical shooter. Like, there's a reason, basically what I'm trying to, there's a reason why I love this specific style of tactical shooter. I like the more close quarters engagements, in games like this. When it comes to more open-ended battlefield areas, I prefer, funny enough, games like Battlefield or PlanetSide for that. Not so much games like Hell Let Loose or Squad or Arma. I prefer tactical shooters being more close quarters, and it's a damn shame that like those are kind of a rarity, at least in that market. Because this game was basically the blueprint of that, and I can appreciate it for that. So, and again, keep in mind this is the PC version. Only the PC version is nominated here. Although to be fair, the console ports are not too bad, especially the Xbox port. The Xbox port is actually fairly competent, even if it has some different storyline beats and different level design. But I still would recommend you guys check out the PC version that's on Steam or GOG or even on Ubisoft Connect if you're one of those people. But anyways, so next up, we've got ourselves the simulation and strategy category, which I've already alluded to was a pretty decently large category. And well, we got ourselves also quite a few bangers in this particular lane as far as games. Like, you'll be surprised with exactly what came from 2003 as far as this category. Because, well, yeah, this was a surprisingly pretty good year for simulation and strategy games. More so strategy, but I mean, well, let's talk about it first. SimCity 4. So this was definitely a game that didn't necessarily come out of nowhere, because there was building anticipation for SimCity 4 by this point, but it was definitely a game that blew a lot of people out of the water, being more heavily tied into its more trading aspects rather than its city building, although the city building is still an integral aspect of this game. I think that it works wonders, especially considering that it uses the Continental system with its save files, where it pre-generates a completely new world and you can build other cities on said world. And I think that's a awesome way in which you can grow your you can grow entire areas in, and I think it works for its benefit. So definitely would recommend you guys check it out. So, and then, well, speaking of long-running EA franchises, we got Command and Conquer Generals. Although, to be fair, this was the first game post-Westwood. This isn't the first game published by EA, but whatever. Command and Conquer Generals. So, this was the Command and Conquer game that pretty much took Command and Conquer into a more contemporary setting. Because keep in mind, with the Tiberium games, those are obviously, well, I mean, both Red Alert and Tiberium, they're both sci-fi, but I guess it's just different types of sci-fi. But the Tiberium series was more so traditional sci-fi, whereas Red Alert was alternate history. This Generals took Command and Conquer and put it into a more, contemporary setting. More modern warfare, as I should say. And while yes, it does have some of that sort of, post 9/11 stench on it that maybe hasn't particularly aged the best, I would definitely say that as far as a game itself, especially for the first Command and Conquer game to be fully in 3D, it was actually pretty good. Like, I think the fact that this was in a more contemporary setting did help things. And I would definitely recommend you guys at least give it a shot. Like, even if, yeah, it has some weird, quirks of that era, I can at least put that aside as just to being like, it was just of that time period. It's still cool. So, but yeah, next up, we've got ourselves Galactic Civilizations, which, yeah, this was the first of that sub-series of grand strategy, sort of RTS, sort of, kind of, strategy games, loosely. And we've talked about some of the other Galactic Civilization games before. Some were better than others, but I wanted to at least give a shout out to the original that came out, especially considering that, like, it kind of helped sort of, make more science fiction based strategy games a bit more popular. That weren't in the Command and Conquer series, of course, because most RTS games around this time were more historically based, specifically Age of Empires, Empire Earth, and, well, Rise of Nations, which we'll get into a second, were definitely more involved with. So having a more grand science fiction based one, I think, helped out a lot. So that's at least something I can commend it for. And it does have pretty cool art direction, I will give it that. So check it out if you can find it. I don't know if it's on Steam. Is it on Steam? Like, I'm gonna check that. It might be on GOG if it's not on. Yeah, if it's not on Steam, then, like, it might be on GOG. Oh no, it is. Okay. It's on. Okay, yeah, it's on Steam. But yeah, as far as like, turn-based grand strategy is concerned, yeah, it is kind of, it might be confusing, but ultimately I do think that, like, it'd be kind of, okay, never mind, don't fuck, okay, scratch that, get it on Steam, like, get it somewhere, like, else, don't, get it on, Steam, because it looks like the Steam version's kind of iffy, so, okay. Okay, so there. There. Friends don't let other friends buy bad games. So I'm just gonna be frank. Just get the GOG version. I'm sorry. Don't. If you try to do the Steam version, then, like, You could probably use PC Gaming Wiki to try to fix it, but that's at least what I'm gonna. That's my 2 cents on that. It does at least look cool. If you like more traditional grand strategy games from around like the 90s, and of course in this case early to mid 2000s, go check it out. So, but anyways, let's move on to Rise of Nations. So this one's kind of a weird one because, funny enough, Rise of Nations wasn't really ever a franchise. I mean, it had one spin-off game in 2006, but it never really got any like traction. And it was only more so just in name. But yeah, Rise of Nations, in a weird sense, I'm kind of surprised this wasn't turned into like a franchise per se. Like, it was just only one game and that was it. But it was one game that definitely was worth it. More RTS in this case. And it took quite a few cues from Empire Earth. It was kind of more so funny enough, a spiritual successor to a game that was already a spiritual successor to Age of Empires. So I guess, the guys just could not let that idea of growing your building up your tech over time thing. So, which I mean, I'm shitting on it, but don't worry, it's a good game. Even if it's a bit more micromanaging, which you guys know is not my preferred style of RTS. I am way more into macro management style of RTS games, but it's still one that I would definitely recommend. Which then leads us into Advance Wars 2. Which, of course, was a follow-up to 2001's Advance Wars, which was pretty solid, and this game is definitely solid as well. Definitely more story-driven, narrative-driven, compared to what came before. Because Advance Wars 1 was definitely more so just about the individual battles. This one definitely tried to take a bit more of a approach to just kind of being a bit more tied to the commanders and generals kind of bickering between each other, obviously fighting those guys up there. And definitely is a game that, like, if you are more into, more conflict-based, turn-based strategy games, I'd recommend you guys check it out. And then, last but not least, we got ourselves Homeworld 2. So, of course, the follow-up to 1999's Homeworld. This game was known for being more of a sci-fi based RTS where you got to command a bunch, like, basically just giant fleets fighting each other, and it is pretty glorious, if I say so myself. I will admit, trying to play the original version of this game is kind of hard. You might have to play the remaster version, which does kind of combine content from both the first and the second Homeworld. So it might be kind of hard for you to find this. But as far as like building upon the ideas that Homeworld did, this was pretty damn cool, and dare I say even pretty fun. So yeah, and again, more macro management, which is something that I do like. So if there's anything to take away from Homeworld 2 is go check it out, especially since it's made by Relic Entertainment, which back in the day they were killing it. So of course I recommend it. So let's get to the winner. So we got ourselves some pretty good choices, but ultimately I think the one I ended up choosing is the best choice. So let's do that, shall we? So the winner of the best sim strategy game of 2003 is... Oh, there we go. SimCity 4! Yeah! SimCity wins! And, well, I think it's definitely for the best, because this game is pretty damn cool. So, I mean, first of all, what makes this game special compared to other SimCity games? Because SimCity's been around since 1989. There are multiple iterations of that were already out by this point. So why play this one instead of those? Well, I mean, first of all, the gameplay itself is extremely streamlined in this game. Like, it's way more, like, it's basically, funny enough, the core gameplay of this is basically the progenitor of what eventually City Skylines would do. Let me explain. So, you know how in City Skylines, you color each district by, like, you got your green districts, which are residential, you got your blue districts, which are basically the more commercial areas, and then yellow is industrial. Well, you can actually thank this game for establishing that as the basis, because as far as I'm concerned, and to be fair, SimCity 2000 and 3000 had a similar mechanic, but it wasn't like to a T like that. But SimCity 4 basically just kind of streamlined the gameplay to where it was basically just that. There weren't a lot of weird technical things you had to worry about necessarily. You still had some of that to worry about, but overall, this was a much better breeze to go through and much easier to set up, by the way. Trying to set up SimCity 2000 and 3000 is a nightmare, and don't even get me started on the original SimCity. Oh my god. So, being able to actually have better, being able to run better, that's pretty awesome. But also the fact that this game has seamless travel and trading between other cities is a really cool aspect. And of course that then ties into the continental mechanic, where I alluded to earlier, where basically each save file that you have for this game is a completely randomly generated continent that you can build wherever you want and build whatever city you want on it, which I find to be a fantastic mechanic for a game like this, because it allows for a lot of creative freedom, which is something that unfortunately not a lot of games have even nowadays. And I think it just kind of allows for, it basically just kind of allows for a lot of cool synergies between things. And, well, this game also has a somewhat of a god mode that they added in here. Not so much in the core gameplay, but more so being able to create your own, how the environment around your city looks. So if you want it to be like a giant ocean, you can do that. If you want it to be a desert, that's fine. If you want to have a ton of trees, you can do that. Just the fact that you can create the environment around your cities was pretty awesome. And even other city builders, even City Skylines, you can't really do that per se. So for a game to have that is pretty awesome. And, well, at least in my opinion, this is the best SimCity game that we ever had, and unfortunately ever will, because, well, the last SimCity game was god awful. So yeah, that is pretty unfortunate. And, well, yes, it is pretty sad, but the fact that we're probably never going to get another great SimCity game, SimCity 4 is a fantastic game that I recommend you guys check out. So, all right, next up, sports, racing, fighting. Funny enough, this was actually a bit harder for me to figure out what games to nominate. I don't know. I thought that there's going to be more games than this, because I've been nominating a lot of racing games because I really started to grow on racing games, especially for a certain somebody. But even just trying to find non-racing games, just general sports games, or even just more fighting games, there wasn't actually a lot released in 2003, or at least that I thought. Obviously, I was able to find just enough games, so it's not like I couldn't find anything, but keep in mind, at least in my opinion, this year was just kind of a weak year for this category. Not that it was a category that we nominated a lot, at least in the earlier half of the series anyways, but it's just something to keep in mind. So, but I do think that the choices that I did end up choosing, most people are going to be okay with. So, F-Zero, let's start with that. So, this one, I will admit, is kind of more of a meme. But, because, Captain Falcon. But, I mean, F-Zero being, like, I find it to still be kind of a cool game, even by, like, the GameCube era. Obviously being less of a realistic racing game and being more about its speed. You got to make sure that you got your turns, like you can actually make your turns correct. It's basically as if you're doing pod racing. And I will admit, I thought that, like, as far as a racing game that was a bit more sci-fi like and more speed heavy, I think this game did it pretty well. And I don't know, I just personally kind of enjoyed it. So, granted, like, I had to do a few hoops to actually play the damn thing, but it would still be a game that I'd recommend you guys at least try to seek out. So, sorry, I'm getting tired. Fuck. So, yeah. And then, well, before we get to the Tony Hawk, let's talk. Speaking of Nintendo, let's do Mario Kart Double Dash, which is a game that I have not actually played until, like, fairly recently, as in, like, in the past year. And yeah, like, Double Dash I thought was actually pretty fun. There are some maps that are stinkers. Every single Mario Kart game does have stinker maps. But I mean, this game, funny enough, it closely reminded me of Mario Kart Wii, which is funny because, that was the first Mario Kart game I ever played. And, I've played pretty much most of the Mario Kart games up, like, actually, yeah, all of them at this point, because, yes, I have played every single one of them. Yes, okay. Sorry, I'm just thinking, because I was thinking, did I play Super Circuit? But yes, I did play Super Circuit. Don't worry. But yeah, no, it did remind me the most of Mario Kart Wii. Probably because a lot of the tracks that were in Double Dash were brought into that, and also the fact that, like, as I mentioned before, the Wii is basically just a glorified GameCube. So yeah, but even, like, the tracks that I've never actually played before, I thought they were pretty fun, especially the one with the dinosaur. Sorry, again, this is still a new game for me somewhat, so I don't remember exactly every single track. Or the one in the downtown. That one's really fun. Like, any of the street-based ones, I think are pretty fun. So, oh yeah, Dry Desert's also in this one, which I like desert-themed things, so I thought that was pretty cool. So, yeah, definitely a good Mario Kart, for sure. And then that then gets us into, well, the Undergrounds, because yes, 2004 had Underground 2 for both Tony Hawk and Need for Speed. And, well, 2003 had also Underground 1 for both Tony Hawk and Need for Speed. So, Tony Hawk Underground, I don't know why, but I've always found that cover to be kind of funny. It's just a graffiti of, like, Tony Hawk or someone on the side. I don't know. It is very California, though, or like very West Coast, I will admit it. But, like, I don't know, I just always found that cover to be kind of funny. But besides that, it is a solid Tony Hawk game. this was actually the first Tony Hawk to be a bit more narrative driven as well. So it's a bit more about you being in a competition and, you know, trying to, you know, go up against all the, you know, your opponents. And I think that, like, this game did a pretty decent job at having its sort of narrative moments while also having some pretty good, you know, solid controls that weren't particularly too changed from the Pro Skater games, but still was different enough to where it was a bit more accessible compared to the Pro Skater Tony Hawk games. Like, you can actually perform ollies a lot better in this. So, yeah, I would definitely say that Underground, Tony Hawk Underground, I need to specify, goddammit, is definitely a game that, like, honestly, even if you're someone who's not into skateboarding, you can definitely get into, especially since it's a bit more, you know, it offers quite a bit as far as gameplay and narrative bits, so that's cool. And now we've got ourselves Need for Speed's Underground. So again, this one isn't necessarily a game that's solely focused on cop chases, so it's not like my preferred Need for Speeds, because again, I'm more into either the Most Wanted games or the Hot Pursuit games. Underground is more so just a sub-series that's more focused on urban street racing, but legal urban street racing, which is fine, but again, I'm way more into ones that are involved with the cop chases, so, but that's just me personally. But it is still a cool Need for Speed game, even if it does have some, like, issues at, you know, here and there. It's still a game that I would at least loosely recommend. So if you want more urban street style of racing in your games. So what is the winner, you may ask? Well, I've got it here, so let's do it. The winner for the best sport/racing/fighting game of 2003 goes to Tony Hawk's Underground. I was debating between this and Super Circuit, but I ultimately ended up choosing Tony Hawk's Underground, especially considering that this is, you know, a pretty respected and even revered game in the Tony Hawk, you know, game franchise. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, this game basically fleshed out the controls to how Tony Hawk games would go from this point onwards. No weird, you know, multi-tapping weird stuff like that. It's a lot more, you know, streamlined and a lot more accessible, but still a game that takes some time to master, and that's something that I always like. Always have your game be something that people can get into, but if you want to fully achieve what you want to have in your game, yeah, like, you know, have those abilities as well. It also is helped by the fact that this game has tons of ways for you to customize your characters, which is always a plus. And also, again, this game is definitely more tied in with its story, specifically, like I said, you entering into a skateboarding competition in which you try to go to the top. Tony Hawk's there because, you know, it's the name of the game, so kind of has to be there. But it might sound cheesy, but at the time, this was actually a pretty big first, because there weren't really a lot of games that were, like, most games, of course, before this were way, like, that had a narrative, were definitely way more grandiose. So to have a game that was a bit more grounded in a more realistic tone definitely made it more it basically made it way more relatable for a lot of people, and that's something that I have to give credit where credit is due. And, well, you see it right there. you can make a good case that this is, in fact, the best Tony Hawk game that's ever been made. So, I gotta at least give it some kudos for that. And thankfully, unlike other games that we've already talked about, this is a game where you can pretty much find this on so many goddamn consoles, it's not even funny. So, this game's pretty... I'd recommend you guys check it out. So, alright, multiplayer games. So, this is going to be a category that's not actually going to... There's not going to be, like, too many games that are going to be deviated from what we've already talked about with this. And, well, truth be told, there wasn't really a category that was given to this from the Game Awards itself. As a matter of fact, the past several categories haven't been either. So, and of course, the more and more we get closer into, you know, the 90s, the less and less this category is going to be relevant because, well, before 2007, esports weren't really a thing, and multiplayer games as a whole just quite weren't there yet. So do keep in mind that, like, these are going to be more so stretches. And also keep in mind that, like, the further and further away the modern day we get, the less likely there's going to be people who are going to be playing these games online. So expect these rankings to be a bit more skewed as me fighting against either, you know, very, very small numbers of players or going up against bots. So I'm just preferencing that right now. So, but as far as what I ended up choosing Command and Conquer Generals for, you know, the fact that it's still an RTS that I think is pretty good in its own right. Rainbow Six 3 Raven Shield because of its fantastic cooperative, like its option to actually play in a more cooperative setting, as well as its multiplayer offerings. Rise of Nations also for being a pretty solid RTS experience. Call of Duty for basically just being a decent little I'm trying to figure this out, but basically just kind of offering pretty large scale battles for a Call of Duty game. Like, some of these, like, maps are way bigger than people would think. And also for bringing a lot of, like, of the staples that we would see in other Call of Duty games. Carentan, of course, being the game that they brought back plenty, like the map that they brought back so many goddamn times. It's insane. And of course, SOCOM 2 for its multiplayer offerings, and for being a pretty big deal as far as, like, online connectivity for the PlayStation 2 at the time. And, well, Mario Kart Double Dash for, of course, offering the same types of multiplayer experiences that were in previous Mario Kart games that were pretty fun here. So, again, these are more so just me doing stretches, if I'm going to be honest, but I think these are generally okay choices. Granted, quite a bit of modern military stuff we got going on here. Yeah, Command & Conquer Generals, Rainbow Six 3, SOCOM 2. Though, admittedly, that was kind of a trend that I did notice starting around here. Call of Duty 4 wasn't particularly the first game to do modern military shooters, like, far none. I'd say that trend, funny enough, was starting around 2003 with, I'd say, these three games in particular. But yeah, you get the point. Is that, like, you know, in the mid-2000s, we started to kind of see the shift towards more modern military shooters, because by 2003, that was the year that, like, World War II games definitely exploded. And while there's not going to be too many of those games that are going to be mentioned in this award ceremony, I just wanted to kind of bring light to that here. So, but anyways, let's go over the winner. It actually might surprise you what I ended up choosing for this. So, but in any event, the winner for the best multiplayer game of 2003 is Command & Conquer Generals. Yeah, this might come as a surprise. Because, well, this is kind of one of those weird games that, again, it has its weird moments. Because this game, again, is a post 9/11 game, and so you're going to see a lot of weird things. It also didn't help that this game came out literally, like, a month before Iraq was invaded, so yeah, that hasn't particularly aged the greatest. But putting that aside and keeping in mind that, like, you're talking to someone who does like modern military settings anyways, it's something that I can at least look past. I mean, first of all, this is already a pretty, like, important game anyways, since this was the first fully 3D Command and Conquer game, because beforehand, well, if we're not counting Renegades, but that's a whole other can of worms. But anyways, as far as, like, Command and Conquer games before this, they were all like 2D sprites. Like, that was just kind of the style that they, like, kept up with up until the early 2000s. So to have a Command and Conquer game fully be in 3D was appreciated. It was also helped by the fact that, again, this was a bit more of a realistic setting, and I like that. I like that, you got to play as these different factions. You got the United States, you got China, and you've got this Middle Eastern faction to play as. Which, that was another thing that I didn't have bulleted on here, but the fact that this game actually decided to go with 3 factions as opposed to just the 2 that other Command and Conquer games had, I actually do kind of like. Granted, for me personally, a minimum should always be 4, but 3 is still always better than 2. Also, all the factions I'd say are pretty balanced for the most part. Map design, I think, is pretty competent to pretty good. And yeah, some of the best just voice lines we've heard in just the series comes from this game. I mean, yeah, just the tank, yeah, like the US tankers or the helicopters for China, or the PLA. There's just quite a bit of variance as far as, like, the units, and they pretty much work in tangent with each other, and that's something I do like. Also, another bulletin that, like, final bulletin, this game has some of the best music in all of Command and Conquer. Oh yeah, and also, well, the typical mod support as well, but this game has some really damn good music. Like, its original soundtrack is so damn good. Funny enough, if you guys remember when I did that Cryfall trailer, I used music from the main theme from this game. It's that damn good. And yeah, no, even if you don't ever play the game, which it is on Steam, finally, they just released it on Steam earlier this year. Even if you never play it, at least go seek out the soundtrack. Command and Conquer has always had amazing soundtracks, and this is no exception. So go check out the soundtrack. And, well, as I typed right there, this game has, albeit very loose, it has some pretty good mod support. So go check it out. All right, expansion packs. So, of course, the continuing of a life of a game. So this is the category that expansion packs should be in, not with other games. They should not be there, but whatever. What did I end up choosing? Well, quite a few, actually. And, well, funny enough, this one, I almost chose one, but because I forgot about another, I ended up having to choose that one instead. So that might slightly spoil what exactly I ended up choosing, but whatever. So, first of all, Battlefield 1942, The Road to Rome. is an expansion that, of course, adds in Italy and France into Battlefield 1942, adds in 6 new maps, and overall, I think just makes 1942 definitely feel more complete than it already was. 1942 was already pretty solid by itself, but adding in some of the other important World War II, countries, I think really did help flesh out this game as a whole. And because of that, I do think this is a overall better expansion than Secret Weapons of World War II. Not that that expansion was bad, it was still a good expansion, but it was more so just kind of secret missions that didn't actually really happen, and a lot of like weird experimental stuff that DICE decided to throw in, whereas this was definitely felt more in line with what they were doing with the base game, and that's something that I do like. We also got Elder Scrolls Blood Moon. So I will admit, Morrowind is not my favorite Elder Scrolls game. But that's a whole other conversation for later. But I will admit, the Tribunal and Blood Moon expansions, they offered a lot of content for your buck. And of course, Blood Moon being the one that was actually released in 2003, obviously gave a lot of, weight to an already pretty expansive world. So I definitely would say that that's definitely a good choice. Sims Superstar, of course, adding more careers into the original Sims, and actually being one of the last for the original Sims, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, being more focused on, just being more of a celebrity per se, and it's something that, well, definitely not like amazing. I would still think is actually kind of a cool, it's not like a required pack. It's just something that kind of add to spice up your gameplay for The Sims 1. So I felt like I had to include it. And we got Warcraft 3's The Frozen Throne, which you can see Arceus right here. Of course, being a fucking creep, but being an enjoyable expansion to arguably one of the best real-time strategy games of all time. And just kind of, bringing a lot of new ideas and heroes into an already pretty fantastic base. And having a pretty good campaign at that. That set the stage for World of Warcraft. For better or for worse. And then we've got ourselves Sid Meier's Civilization 3 Conquests, which of course basically just focused more on the military aspect of Civilization 3, adding a lot more tools at your disposal and all that fun stuff. But of course, let's get to the winner. I think it's pretty obvious which is gonna win. But we're still gonna anticipate because it's funny. But either way, here we go. So the award for the best expansion of 2003 goes to Warcraft 3, The Frozen Throne. Yeah, I mean, you're talking to someone who's a massive RTS fan, and I will admit, I almost gave the win to Battlefield Road to Rome. But I literally forgot that this existed until right before, until literally yesterday. I know, I'm stupid, but I am so happy that I actually did not forget because, well, yeah, no, this is a pretty big expansion as far as this series is concerned. Because, well, I mean, first of all, it did expand the unit roster, so it added in a lot more. I added in pretty much units to every single faction, whether it be the humans, the orcs, the elves, or the undead. Added in a lot more stuff for those, which was pretty nice. But also, this game's campaign Because keep in mind, Warcraft 3 was always known for having its more story-driven campaign compared to other RTS games at the time. This was pretty big, and it pretty much set the stage for what the story for World of Warcraft would eventually become. And I'd say that's pretty big in its own deal. Also, the fact that this added in some new heroes, including the main guy right here, Arceus, I'd say was definitely a welcome addition to this roster. Also, this expansion helped balance some of the quirks that were in the base game, which is always something that I think everyone would definitely like, especially in these types of games. So that's cool. And, well, of course, as a bonus, mod support. Granted, modern Blizzard hates mods because of, what some of the mods from this came from, but I mean, if you can try to find an original copy of Warcraft 3's Frozen Throne, or even just the base game, it'll be worth it. So, alright, so before we get into the last 3 categories, I'm actually going to be right back. I'm gonna go to the restroom. So yeah, I'll be right back. Alright. Wow, we've been going through this way faster than I was thinking we were going to do. Damn. Although, to be fair, I have way more creative freedom for this particular list, so I think that's partially why. That, and also, I admit, I did kind of rush through a lot of those, but who cares? My awards show is definitely better than this the Spike version. Let's just be real here. Even if you don't agree with my choices, this was still better. But anyways, so we've got ourselves the final 3 categories already. So first of all, best art direction. So of course, as always, this is the most subjective part of the show. So whether or not you agree with me, that is completely fine. But I think these are definitely the games that I think, personally anyways, fit the bill the best. So as far as games that I ended up choosing, I chose SimCity 4 for its really cool use of both 2D and 3D aspects. Silent Hill 3 for its more cringy, grimy sort of look that still looks pretty fucked up and cool to this day. Jak 2 for its more sort of mixings of like, cultural and science fiction elements into its world and level design. Mario Kart Double Dash for its pretty unique looking tracks that all definitely do kind of blend together into this world. Beyond Good and Evil for its contemporary science fiction look, and of course Ratchet and Clank 2 also being, or Going Commando also being for its contemporary science fiction look. So I think most these are pretty good choices, but that's just me personally. But anyways, here we go. So the best art the award for best art direction for 2003 goes to SimCity 4. I'm mostly awarding this due to the fact that, honestly, this was kind of one of the last games of its type. But let's discuss this. So, SimCity 4, it uses a mix between both 2D sprites and 3D backdrops for its world. Because, well, again, this came from the mid-2000s by this point. And, well, I think it is actually kind of a cool combination. And it helped make the game look pretty timeless. Like, you could say that, yeah, this game does look like it could be from the 90s, but it doesn't, it also looks like something that could have been from this time period as well, the 2000s. And wow, it's from the 2000s. And at least in my opinion, that's ultimately what really does make a game, is if you can make a game look timeless, that's a really damn good sign. And yeah, this was kind of, if not the last, at least one of the last AAA games to have that 2D look, which is a damn or at least, well, unless you want to count Octopath Traveler 15 years later, but definitely of that original guard of 2D sprites. Yeah, this was the last AAA game, at least in my mind, that this was kind of doing, and that's sad and unfortunate because it's definitely an art style that people do think is the most timeless as far as video games are concerned. And there's a reason why thousands of indie games have taken the approach of using pixel art as their go-to. So even if this ends up even if this was the last game, or at least the last game by a AAA publisher to adopt the pixel art style, it at least went off with a pretty good bang. That you cannot deny. So, especially with, at least in my opinion, one of the best city builders of all time. So, all right, best narrative. Again, similar to multiplayer, this is kind of a category where the more and more we go away from the modern age, the more and more this is going to be even more iffy to try to, judge and rank ourselves. But I did end up choosing a few games that I think people are going to generally agree upon. But yeah, definitely do keep in mind that story was definitely not the main driving factor for a lot of games going from this point onwards, for sure. Definitely quite a few, but not every game. So I ended up, of course, choosing, I'd say, the best contenders for this category. Silent Hill 3, of course, for, following Heather as she goes through not only Silent Hill, but also some of the surrounding towns and trying to figure out this whole thing. Knights of the Old Republic for its amazing world building, its narrative depth on about identity, as well as just kind of the mythos of Star Wars thousands of years before the prequels. Max Payne 2, of course, kind of going into the aftermath of the events of the first Max Payne and just kind of the consequences of that. Tony Hawk's Underground for its more, sort of grounded storyline where, it's just more so about, the hardships and challenges in this sort of skateboarding competition. Beyond Good and Evil, also for its pretty damn good world building and it's more just sort of funny enough, more kind of close-hearted story. And of course Broken Sword for some of the continuing of that sort of treasure hunting storytelling that was going on in the first two games, just kind of done in a more up-to-date style by this point. So definitely choices, but are they good choices? Well, yeah, but what's the choice that's going to win? That's the real question. Well, I'll answer that right now. So, the Best Narrative Award for 2003 goes to Silent Hill 3. It should be pretty obvious as to why this was the winner. Anyone who has played any Silent Hill game, at least by Team Silent themselves, know why exactly this is going to be the winner. So, of course, like I said, it follows Heather as to where it kind of, it basically just kind of tries to try to tie a lot of the loose ends that involve her past, as it is directly linked to Silent Hill itself. And of course, that's not just the town. I'm also referring to the first Silent Hill game itself. Because, well, let's just say there's a lot of, loose threads that could be answered if you played this game. Ha ha ha. Okay, all jokes aside, even if you've never played Silent Hill 1, you can still appreciate the story at hand here. And definitely see that, this definitely is a bit more of an interpersonal story while dealing with a lot of the interpersonal struggles as Silent Hill started to kind of do with Silent Hill 2, but just those similar themes explored in 3. And that's something that I can appreciate. And also, this game has multiple endings, but the good ending is very hard to get. It's easily, one of the harder good endings that you can try to get into a game. So do keep that in mind, that if you really want to get the good ending, you're gonna have to do really damn good on your first playthrough. So, and well, of course, it sucks to say, but this was kind of the last great Silent Hill game. Silent Hill 4 is still a respectable game. I gave it a lot of credit, but in a lot of people's eyes, Silent Hill 3 was kind of the last worthwhile Silent Hill game to check out. So, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. Although before we move on to our Game of the Year, I do want to say that, yes, I know I have played through Silent Hills 1 and 2, but I've not streamed Silent Hill 3 yet, or Silent Hill 4. That is going to change at some point. So, in October, I will be streaming Silent Hills 3 and 4 for horror extravaganza, or Halloween extravaganza. So, I'm pretty excited about that. So, stay tuned. It's just, I know I haven't streamed Silent Hill 3. I was going to do it last year, but because of the technical hoops I had to go through, I'm going to need to find a good way to play it on PC. Because, there's some weird issues with trying to find the PC version, or at least a good PC version of it, since, it's no longer accessible. But you get the point. I will try to make sure that Silent Hill 3 will be played. And thankfully, Silent Hill 4 is on GOG, so that's pretty much, an easy source for me to find that game. Even if those are going to be the only other Silent Hill games I end up playing, I think it's going to be worth it in the end. So, that's nice. But anyways, last award, Game of the Year. So, the final award of the night, or at least, well, what should have been the final award of the night, as I already said at the very beginning, the Spike Game Awards ended up having this as the first award for some stupid reason.
That was his mistake.
I don't fucking know why. It's stupid. But whatever. But I mean, whatever. They released they did it at as the first award. They couldn't have had too much time to it, right? Like they didn't have too many, nominees for it, right? That's where you're wrong. They did have a bunch of nominees for it, and unfortunately, as we've already established, nominees that shouldn't even be on here. So, I mean, it should be pretty obvious that I would definitely say out of these nominees, okay, first of all, GTA Vice City and Splinter Cell should not be on here. Again, Vice City was released in 2002, not 2003. So, granted, it is a highly, highly, highly popular and respected game in the GTA series, but for Game of the Year for 2003, no. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, again, a game that I really like. I streamed that game multiple times for you guys, and I think it's actually a really damn good game in a lot of ways. It's one of my favorite stealth games ever. But, again, 2002 game, not 2003. So, again, just unfortunately, would not count for the sake of this list. And, well, also, surprisingly enough, for a lot of people, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker would also not qualify for this list. Yeah. Why? Because this was originally a 2002 release in Japan. So, while it does qualify for a 2002 nominee, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, it does not qualify for 2003 thing. So, still respectable games. I'm not shitting on any of them. Mostly. They are pretty good games. It's just, they just do not qualify for this particular category because they are from a different year. So, unfortunate, but it's the truth. Star Wars Galaxies. This, funny enough, was a MMO that was released around this time. MMOs were starting to become a bit of a thing, but they weren't really huge quite yet until World of Warcraft. So, a decent idea to try to do, Star Wars MMORPG. What can go wrong? You can't play this game anymore. The servers were shut down years ago. Back when? When was this shut down? (2011). I never had the chance to play this. And you want to know why this was shut down? Well, because, what else came out in 2011? Funny enough, the MMO version of Knights of the Old Republic that you see right there, the Old Republic. So, again, for very similar reasons to PlanetSide, I just could not in good faith nominate this because I never have played it and I never will be able to play it legitimately. So, yeah. So, yeah. And then, well, SSX3. Really? Game of the year for SSX3? No. Also, Madden 2004? Hell fucking no. That's the worst choice you can ever have. Why did you nominate a Madden game? I mean, it's the Spike Game Awards. What am I expecting here? But you see also another problem, though. Again, not only is this bloated, but look how many there are this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games. 10. 10. What the fuck? Okay. That is way too many nominees. Just fucking pick and choose. And, well, here's the other problem. You're choosing too many games that not only do not even fit the qualifications of genuinely good game design, but you're also choosing games that didn't even come out this year. Again, if it was just cut in half, like if you removed GTA Vice City, Splinter Cell, Wind Waker, Madden, and SSX, you would have a much better list. A much better list on here. Even though I still wouldn't have preferred Star Wars Galaxies, and truth be told, even though I do like Freedom Fighters and I do like SOCOM 2, I wouldn't choose those for Game of the Year. That's a bit of a stretch. They're good games, but a bit of a stretch to nominate them for Game of the Year. Like, honestly, I'd say the best choices here were Knights of the Old Republic and Tony Hawk's Underground. Like, I'd say those are definitely, like, the best choices here. Not fucking Madden or SSX3. But here's the thing, though. That's not even the worst part. You know what the worst part about this is? I'm cringing thinking about this, by the way. I saw this with Goldie, and both of us cringed equally. Yes, boo at the Game Awards. I am not making this up. Not only did they nominate 10 games in total, 10 games. Not only did they nominate 3 games that weren't even released this year, and they had 2 awful fucking, sports games on here. Keep in mind that, like, snubbing games that should actually be on here, like Prince of Persia or Rainbow Six or shit, even Call of Duty. I'd rather take Call of Duty here. And not even going over the fact that, like, this was the first award that they gave out. They gave the worst choice on here the win. Hoodie-itis is well and alive, ladies and gentlemen. This is the prime example of Hoodie-itis I've ever fucking seen. Hoodie-itis being the objectively worst choice in an award ceremony, being the winner, by the way. For those who need context. Hoodie-itis. God, this is so bad. This right here sums it all up. This screen right here that you see represents about half of what was wrong with the Spike Video Game Awards. Again, I know I've shit on the New Game Awards, and I will continue to shit on them if they keep doing a lot of the dumb decisions that they've been doing in the past recent years. But let it be known, even those clowns are doing better than this. Because, well, those might be clowns, but whoever made this is a dumbass. And I'm willing to call them a dumbass. Again, it shouldn't surprise you, unfortunately. Again, like, the fucking Spike Game Awards were more concerned about being a quote-unquote alpha male with every goddamn person who was on there, and was concerned about, exploiting, women's parts rather than, like, actually, giving out genuine awards. And, I wouldn't be too surprised if one of the hosts ended up, being on some sort of, like, watch list. So, So, yeah. Bad all around. So, I hate to break it to you guys, but yeah, this is the worst. This is the worst. I can't top this. So, let's actually fix this. Because no matter what I end up choosing, it's going to be better than this, and you are going to agree with me on that. How the fuck was Rainbow Six 3, Silent Hill 3, and Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time not on that list? Where the fuck were they, Spike Game Awards? Oh my god. Also, we're going to throw in SimCity 4 in there. Fuck it. And keep in note, every single one of these have already been given at least one award. Which showcases that, yeah, I give more of a shit about, what came out that year than some fucking, asshole 45-year-old at the time. Like, God. I'm sorry, I am getting a little bit pissed. But you get my point. This is how you do choices and nominees for Game of the Year. And, well, most people are going to agree with these. Because, again, 2003 may have not been the best year in video game history. Like, it's definitely one of the weaker years that we've covered in the 2000s. But that doesn't mean you have to just, give up and just give it a fucking Madden. A game that has been the same shit for 25 fucking years. And is literally the bane of everything I fucking hate about this planet. So, never fucking give Madden the win. It doesn't even deserve to ever get, like a nominee, let alone an award. So, these are choices that you should be giving. SimCity 4, of course, for its, fantastic way in which it streamlined the SimCity formula and adding in the ability for you to create your own, basically, like, kind of mess around with, like, the terrain and making the continent your own. Rainbow Six 3 Raven Shield for its fantastic close quarters combat. It's, also streamlining a lot of the stuff that some of the other Rainbow Six games did, and doing it in a way that is way more feasible in its core gameplay, and being a fantastic shooter all around. Silent Hill 3 for its fantastic narrative, just kind of, rectifying and just burying the hatchet from, like, whatever past you grew up in, and just being an overall fantastic horror game. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic being arguably one of the best RPGs of all time, and people swearing by it is the best piece of Star Wars content ever, which is something I forgot to mention, which I don't know if I agree with that, but the fact that people swear as this being one of the best pieces of Star Wars content of all time is a testament to that game. And of course, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time being a fantastic action-adventure platformer with some amazing level design, acrobatic detail, and, being very more forgiving compared to other games of its type. So, think about your choices. Because unfortunately, in 20 plus years, there's going to be some fucking people like me who are going to fucking laugh at you for choosing terrible choices. So, these games have aged way better than Madden 04. So, don't at me. So, but of course, let's give the real Game of the Year 2003. I'm just going to be blunt about that. Let's give the award to the real winner of this particular year in gaming. So, here we go. The final award. So, to wrap this all up, let's get this over with. So, the award for Game of the Year of 2003 goes to Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. An objectively better game for this. Although it was actually a pretty close one. I was pretty close to choosing Rainbow Six. Hell, I was even close to choosing Silent Hill 3 or like KOTOR. But ultimately, I ended up choosing Sands of Time. Because I think overall, this game honestly had a pretty big impact. Like, I mean, KOTOR did as well, but this game, I think, had a pretty big impact in and of itself as well. Of course, I don't want to repeat myself with what I said earlier about this game, but of course, being a worthy reboot of a pretty legendary franchise is well warranted. Its gameplay is pretty fun, blending action, adventure, platforming, and just general parkour all together into one complete package, I think is definitely something that is worth noting. Also, this game, I am biased because I'm someone who loves Middle Eastern architecture, Middle Eastern just sort of aesthetics and culture. And granted, while definitely not up to like exactly up to like, modern interpretation, this game has amazing atmosphere in that department. Also, Indian influence as well, because let's not forget about the fact that like this game also has sections that do take place in India, and those sections also are pretty cool looking. Not exactly Middle East, but still also a region of the world that I find fantastic looking. Funny enough, I know we were playing Hitman 2 the other day, and I was, just in awe, just kind of walking around the streets in India in that game. And yeah, I don't know, just North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. I have a map poster on my wall right there. So just for context, I'm just looking at the thing, but it's just those are just parts, just that sort of region I just find super fascinating, and just to have a game dedicated to just some of those regions is pretty awesome, and it's just something I've always appreciated. Yeah, I already mentioned the blending of genres, and well, this game is considered by many to be one of the best games of all time. Like, as far as action, adventure, platforming, parkour, hybrid games are concerned, this is considered to be one of the best. And it was heavily influential to other franchises, specifically Assassin's Creed. I mean, I already mentioned this, but Assassin's Creed was originally supposed to be a Prince of Persia game, but got blown up into its own franchise. So, you've got nothing but this game to thank for that. So, especially considering its combat style. So yeah, overall, pretty big deal as far as video games, and is a game that I would highly recommend you guys check out for yourselves. It if only the movie was as good as the game. God. Yes, I had to remind you that there was a 2010 Prince of Persia: Sands of Time movie that has nothing to do with this game, by the way. Only in name. Only in name. I fucking hate Disney. Anyways, let's recap as far as the awards. So, Best Action Adventure went to Silent Hill 3. Best Platformer Game went to Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. Best RPG went to Knights of the Old Republic. Best Shooter Game went to Rainbow Six Raven Shield, the PC version. Best Sim Strategy went to SimCity 4. Best Sports Racing Fighting Game went to Tony Hawk's Underground. Best Multiplayer went to Command & Conquer Generals. Best Expansion went to Warcraft 3 The Frozen Throne. Excuse me. Best Art Direction went to SimCity 4. Best Narrative went to Silent Hill 3. And of course, the Game of the Year went to Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. As far as my personal top 10 favorites, just out of curiosity, people are going to be surprised by a few of the picks I ended up choosing. Obviously, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, Rainbow Six 3 Raven Shield, Silent Hill 3, Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, Knights of the Old Republic, SimCity 4, Command & Conquer Generals, the original Call of Duty, but also Tony Hawk's Underground and Mario Kart Double Dash. Again, I do think those games were pretty cool. But I guess it's also kind of reflective of 2003 kind of being an okay year. Which, of course, there were still some snubs, but I'm going to give them some honorable mentions here. Even some guilty pleasures. So, some shoutouts I am willing to give out include Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb. I heard that was the best Indiana Jones game. So, if that's interests you, there you go. Dynasty Warriors 4, a game that I was kind of close to nominating, but the score on Metacritic wasn't particularly high. I know it's not like the end-all be-all, but yeah, I had to kind of give in. Tenchu, Wrath of Heaven, of course, Tenchu being a pretty old stealth series that unfortunately has been kind of forgotten to time. Still a pretty good game in its own right. Also, shout out to Day of Defeat, not so much for the game itself, but just for being, leading to what Day of Defeat Source was, which I think is a much better version of Day of Defeat in my opinion. I don't know, Day of Defeat's kind of 50-50 for me. Planet Side, because of its science fiction sort of, basically breaking a lot of grounds and doing it in a science fiction setting. SWAT, Global Strike Team, being, a spin-off of the Police Quest series. More action arcadey shooter as opposed to tactical shooter, but still enjoyable. Now, okay. This is the game that I know a lot of people are screaming at me, what the hell? Why didn't you nominate this? Star Wars Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy. I've not actually played this game. So that's why I haven't nominated it. It's because I just haven't gotten the time to play it. So that, and also this was kind of one of those games that blended genres anyways, because yeah, it's a shooter game, but it's also an action adventure, but it's also it's one of those types of games where it's like I don't know where to nominate it for. So yeah. Still a game that I definitely do respect, though, and a lot of people swear it as being one of the best Star Wars games of all time. So I wanted to at least give it a nod. I just have not played it yet. Although, speaking of licenses, Lord of the Rings Return of the King was a surprisingly pretty good game. So, again, movie license games are kind of iffy if they don't start with Star Wars, but I also mentioned if it starts with Lord of the Rings, it's pretty safe as well, so go check that out. Also, shout out to the original Siren, or Forbidden Siren in certain countries. Also a horror game, Japanese horror. Medal of Honor Rising Sun, another game I was close to nominating because I think the game is actually pretty cool, being one of the few games that solely focuses on the Japanese front of World War II. But again, similar to Dynasty Warriors 4, it didn't really get that many high ratings. And besides, we already filled up the shooter category anyways, so I don't know, people were starting to think that Medal of Honor was declining around this time. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't know. Give it a shot. So, Legacy of Kain Deliverance being an RPG for like one of the last of its franchise around this time, being more RPG focused. And then we got ourselves 13, which of course was nominated by the actual Game Awards, but a game that there's already too many other games that I would have preferred over it to nominate, so it just kind of got here. But I do want to give it an honorable nod. So, yeah, that concludes the Caspian Game Awards for 2003 and the final Game Awards that we're doing that are based off of the actual Game Awards. But like I said at the beginning, fret not, because we are in fact going to be continuing the series. Which I'm excited about, because that means I've got way more creative freedom, like from this point onwards. I don't have to ramble or rant about, the Game Awards choosing just straight up objectively terrible choices. So, or at least, well, for 2002 up until we get to 1995, I will actually be doing 2024 regardless of, so I'll do that after I do 1995. And again, if you guys want me to, let me know if you guys want to hear my thoughts for 1990 to 1994 as well, because I'm more than willing to give out awards for those. It's just, that's going to be a bit more difficult, since I'm going to have to definitely take some liberties as far as some of the genre and awards just in general. So do keep that in mind. But either way, I hope you guys thoroughly did enjoy. If you guys are watching this on Twitch, of course, hit that follow button down below and turn the bell icon. If you're watching this on Twitch, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also turn the bell icon over there. While you guys are at it, make sure to check out the links down below as well, specifically Discord and SoundCloud. As I would definitely greatly appreciate you guys check those out. If you guys haven't already, you can also hit the subscribe button if you're watching this on Twitch, if you want to directly support me. If you can't necessarily do that, that's completely fine. I'm just glad that you guys ended up watching this into your time. But regardless of all that, though, I'm hoping to see you guys throughout this week with some more streams. It's just, I've been more busy with other things, so, but I'll make sure that there will be more streams for you guys at a time. But in any event, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, or good rest of your night, or whatever. Have a good one, and peace out. Bye.